Hello everyone, welcome to a new episode of 99 zu 1. We welcome you all. This is another English-speaking episode because this is a topic that we have tackled in German language quite often, but I do think it also warrants an examination with a non-German speaking audience or with non-German speaking guests. So I'm going to talk today with Yiannis from Antithesi. Antithesis, they're Marxist Greek Athens-based collective, and I have to say that I stumbled across them a little bit by accident. Some of my Facebook friends have been in touch with them, and they posted an article, which we are going to talk about today in great detail, called War and Crisis. We're going to put the link in the info box below. And I just wrote them, said like, wow, that's a really great article about what's going on right now. And then we met up, had a few beers, and decided, okay, let's do this interview together. And I welcome Yiannis. Pleasure to have you on the show.
Hello, Daniel. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be in the show. And yeah, we can start whenever you want.
Nice, cool. Before we dive head on into the interview about the text War and Crisis, let's just quickly introduce yourself. So who is Antithesi? When were you founded? And what's your aim with your organization?
Okay, so Antithesi is a small communist group that was founded in 2016. We are, at this point, it's just two of us, me and Vangelia. And our aim is to contribute to the circulation of struggles and to the development of struggles, of social and class struggles. And we do that through the publication of our own texts and translations, which aim at the self-critique of the experience of these struggles in order to overcome their limits. Also, we try to analyze the current social and political situation, both in Greece and internationally.
So you have self-critique because you're aiming to have, how can I say, if you want to attack something, you need to understand it. So
yes. I mean, because we see ourselves not as an external observer and a spectator of the struggles, but we try to participate within the social movements. And so our point of view is greatly influenced by this position and perspective. And yeah.
Let's just quickly, this is not like broader topic of the interview, but I want to point it out. But you're also currently pretty busy because you had this horrible train accident, this head-on collision in Greece just a few days ago. Maybe when this interview is broadcast, maybe it's a couple of weeks ago, but still not too long ago. So you're also active in that uprising, which is currently happening?
Yes, we are part of we participate in the demonstrations that have been organized in the previous days and weeks, in the previous week. And we're also part of, we participate in an assembly that has been created against the systematic underfunding and degradation and privatization of the railway network in Greece, which has led to this horrible event, which is a murder, actually, of more than 57, I think, persons by capital and the state. That's how we see it, because of this systematic degradation and devaluation of not only the railway network, but in general of all social services in Greece since at least 2010.
Yeah, well, it just keeps coming, I have the feeling right now for Greece. So there is, it's really how can I say, a volatile situation currently because the cracks in the system are very visible right now. I do have the feeling that we have a little bit of a similar but different situation in Germany. Different as in we're a pretty rich country and our infrastructure is, let's say, okayish maintained. It's not lethal yet. We'll see about that. Just ask me in a couple of years. But we're also still also already in some sort of crisis mode, and this is also the title of your text. I think the text is about a year old. It's called War and Crisis. I really liked it because it made how can I say, it made a broader view of how, for example, also Corona and other things influenced the likelihood of like a hot outbreak of a simmering conflict in Eastern Europe. You told me that this is part of a series. A series
Yes.
about what?
So initially we thought about discussing with other comrades, not only Antithesi, not only on the specific subject of the connection of the crisis with the eruption of the war and the current socioeconomic situation in Russia and Ukraine, but also we wanted to perform a criticism of anti-imperialism and of the concept of imperialism, because we wanted to focus on an understanding of the state as the political form of capital, and not as an independent actor that we could, occupy and use it for socialist revolution, something like that. And also we want to criticize left nationalism and the various forms of warmongering and holy union between the classes, which we now see, for example, in Ukraine, with the support and the participation of many anarchists mainly, but leftists in general in the war effort. And there's no critique at all of nationalism and of war, and of war as a feature of capitalist violence and domination and exploitation of people and the working class. And also we wanted to defend the notion and the activity and the tradition, I would say, of revolutionary defeatism.
Mm-hmm.
It comes from the First World War, the position of the internationalists against the participation of the working class in the First World War. We know that there was such a movement in Russia and in Italy and in many other countries in Europe, but minoritarian even then. But I mean, it was how we see it is that it was the only correct position for the interests and for the needs of and for the possibilities of our class and of the population, and we actually think that it's the same case now. Mm-hmm. And that's why we wanted to have a more broader text that would include also these two other subjects: the critique of imperialism and anti-imperialism, and the critique of left nationalism and the support of revolutionary defeatism. Mm-hmm. Finally, 3 texts were published. The first one 1 year ago, and the second, the third one last November, I think, or beginning of December, in an American journal, communist journal, mm-hmm. Called the Insurgent Notes, mm-hmm. and they can be found on the internet.
Mm-hmm. Let's put them all in the info box below the video. I think it's interesting for everyone to see. So maybe you can send them to me after the interview.
Yes.
What I really liked is a lot of debate around the war in the Ukraine is focusing on like terms, on buzzwords like NATO and expansion of the Western capitalist sphere in Eastern Europe. And while you're not negating this at all, you also put like a very, very, very strong focus on the economic aspects of the situation. Mm-hmm. Like how did we even get there? And do you think that this aspect, this economic view, this strongly economic view, is being neglected in public?
Okay, first of all, I must say that the war that has been raging for over 1 year since the invasion of the Russian army is an event of world historical significance, and its outcome will probably seal the end of the post-Soviet era, mm-hmm. and the drawing of a new global geopolitical map. So, of course, the geopolitical dimension is there, and the issue of the NATO expansion, the change of the geopolitical balance of forces, and so on and so forth. For us, however, what is essential and vital is not all sorts of geopolitical analysis and this from from above view of the situation, because it has to do with the interests of the states and not of the population. But as we see it, what is essential and vital is the horrific consequences of the war against the life, needs, and the potential of the working class and the population, both in Ukraine and Russia and throughout the world, including, of course, Greece as well. On the one hand, we have hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians and Russians dead already on the battlefields and as victims of the bombardments, millions of new refugees, misery, cold, and darkness caused by cut off of the electricity, various shortages of of primary products and to cover basic needs, and all this compose a very grim and inhuman scenery in the areas near or around the battlefield. But at the same time, war and inflation are being exploited to pass the cost of the capitalist crisis, because there is a global capitalist crisis, to our class at the global level. And apart from the geopolitical dimension, there is this dimension of the renewal of capitalist accumulation through war and inflation, based on the impoverishment and the killing and the murder of millions, possibly, of people, of proletarians, in Russia and in Ukraine, first of all, but then, the impoverishment and the degradation of, of everyday life and of the coverage of basic needs is something that we think that affects everyone, because of the rise of the prices, and all the consequences of the war. And so these developments for us highlight the limits of the geopolitical analysis, not only the limits, and the different perspective, which is the state perspective. Whereas we're more interested for a class perspective. And a class perspective essentially, includes this economic dimension. And that is why we try to attempt what we see as a class analysis of the social, economic, and political situation in Russia and Ukraine in the period that preceded the war, but also not only in Russia and Ukraine, also more global overview, with the aim of identifying the deeper cause of the conflict and what we have to, to face and what we have to confront politically.
You started as early as 2008 with the Great Recession. Can you quickly brush us up? What was going on there, like in relation to what is happening now?
Okay, the Great Recession. Okay, I cannot go into the why the Great Recession happened, but because we will need a lot of time to do that.
The episode on its own, yes.
Yes, but the Great Recession that followed the financial collapse of 2008 was addressed at that time mainly by the central banks of the United States and of the United Kingdom through the reduction of the interest rates, the economy, and the implementation of the so-called quantitative easing programs. Okay, this was not immediately followed in the European Union, but after some time also it followed in the European Union as well. And so huge amounts of money were injected into the market to support the capitalist economy, resulting in an increase of all forms of debt, an increase in government debt, corporate debt, and household debt. In Greece we had also crisis of debt crisis because of this situation. At the same time, there has been no resolution of the problems of the capitalist economy, of the overaccumulation of capital, and this can be plainly seen that the global rate of investment in production has not returned to the levels that were prevalent before 2008, On the contrary, the investment on fixed capital has never been as low as they were in the previous decade, the 2010s. And so, as far as we see it, the capitalist refusal to invest in the capitalist production is due to its low profitability compared with speculative investments in the stock exchange and the real estate markets. And this low profitability is in turn the result of a number of factors. For example, I can mention some: the increase in the cost of fixed and variable capital due to the destruction of the natural environment, the increase in the cost in the value composition of capital due to the automation of industrial production, the increase of the cost of capital, the insufficient increase in the degree of exploitation of the labor power due to the barriers to the reduction of the direct and the social wage imposed by existing social expectations and struggles, and by the needs for the reproduction of healthy labor power. The needs of the legitimization of the capitalist states, especially in the West, as well as a number of other factors. I cannot go into detail about that, but we see that, what followed the 2008 recession, the Great Recession, was not the politics that were, the economic policies that were followed with the quantitative easing did not, overcome the contradictions and the problems that were accumulating within the global capitalist economy. I'm not sure if I responded to what.
No, you did. Yeah, you did. So this was the foundation on which then the next big thing happened, and this was the global pandemic, which also had a significant effect on global economy. I remember Klaus Klamm, having him on the show ages ago. I think second or third episode overall. So, and he said that this crisis will have implications that we can't even foresee yet. And one of the things that happened in the pandemic was the complete breakdown of global supply chains, and ships could not be processed, for example, in the big harbors in China, for example, for a long time. In the text, you even have how can I say, a graphic that shows how many ships were being on hold to have their cargo processed. Why were these global supply chains so insanely, how can I say, so vulnerable? And what did this lead to?
Okay, on the one hand, for sure, the global pandemic and the lockdowns, blocked the transports initially, But even after the recovering of the supply of raw materials and the recovery of shipping, supply problems persisted because the money injected by the central banks did not go sufficiently into the investment in production because of the reasons that I said before, on the one hand, and because of a long-term trend towards the reduction of our inventories in order to lower the cost of fixed capital. Which made supply chains very vulnerable, because if you don't have inventories and then there is a breakdown of transport, then
the trend to this just-in-time production
go crazy. It creates deadlocks and bottlenecks everywhere, and this somehow is transmitted from the one point to the other, and especially between the main centers of production, which have to be connected in order to deliver the final products.
So
also, if I may add something, the fear of shortages has led to speculative practices of withdrawing and hiding raw materials from the market. And also this had a nationalist overtone as well.
So trying to save as much as you can for yourself to keep your own population happy, and then who cares about the rest? And from your opinion, I think it's not the same. But wasn't it that Germany, for example, bought up a lot of vaccines before everyone else could even like try to get some? And right now we have a similar situation with the liquid gas that Germany is practically buying up storages all over the world. And with the price increase, poorer countries couldn't afford. But even if they could afford, they couldn't get it because Germany has already bought them.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, strong national. And I think that this nationalism, this vigor behind nationalism is also one of the reasons why there's so much, how can I say, passion about this topic and war, because it's a lot about our like in a national well-being. So you already said that they did things like they hid reserves that they had, or to be able to better speculate with them. But what were other measures or programs to counter the crisis coming from the pandemic?
Okay, so there was, the quantitative easing initially was continued within the period of the pandemic, but this actually led to the problem of oncoming stagflation. That is to say, inflation with economic stagnation. And that's why the economic orthodoxy said that what they have to do is to replace the pandemic stimulus programs with monetary and fiscal austerity policies. On the one hand, the central banks raised and continued raising interest rates and sold assets that had been acquired by them during the period of the quantitative easing. On the other hand, governments headed toward deficit reductions through tax increases and spending cuts. And so this situation of the high interest rates, on the one hand, reduces the real income of those burdened with floating rate loans and increase the cost of borrowing for business. And as a result, they lead to a decrease of consumption and investment in the economy. And states are moving towards this direction as inflation and monetary instability have worsened since the start of the war in Ukraine. And so the outcome will for sure be a reduction of the rate of growth on a global level. And given the increased levels of debt due to the pandemic, it is certain that defaults will erupt, and austerity programs will be imposed in a number of developing countries. This has already happened in Sri Lanka, as we write in the text, and I have to check about an update about that, about other cases, but already Sri Lanka is such a case. And so there was this report by the United Nations that somehow described the situation. And also they noted that this creates a highly likelihood of social unrest and discontent, which we think is already seen. At the same time, of course, this is a classical approach for exiting the crisis, the devaluation and destruction of capital through a recession. And so we think that that's what's happening right now. And they don't care about the well-being of the population, of class, and of the proletarian class, of the workers. They only care about how to overcome the problems that are created in the economy because of the stagflation. Because inflation may be at some points good for capitalist profits, but from a point onwards it becomes very problematic because it leads to the devaluation of assets. Yes. So I'm not sure if
No, it's a good how can I say perspective on the situation that we were in globally. And I would start to focus now, like individually, on Russia and Ukraine, because what a lot of people don't know is that war is always like a very, very significant gamble, even in capitalist society. It is, how can I say, to me, where there's that saying that capitalism carries war like a cloud carries rain. I think it was a French socialist a couple of hundred years ago. But still, it's also a risk, because if it goes haywire, it can really destroy influence. It can destroy a lot of things. So looking at Russia was in an unprecedented economic decline after the fall of the Soviet Union, like almost hilariously. So it was like a very bad joke. So communism ends and the shit hits the fan, or the state communism of the Soviet Union ends and all things go haywire. When did this turn around, and by what measures? Because they had an increase in economic growth after some time again.
Okay, the economic recovery of Russia started around 1999, which is around the period when Putin rose to power. He was given I'm not sure about the word. He was given the scepter, the
scepter,
by
yes.
Yeah, by Boris Yeltsin, whose government was really faced very big discontent because of completely destroyed situation, as you described before. And so this recovery started after 1999 with the outbreak of war in Chechnya. To a large extent, the recovery of Russian economy was not based on local factors. It was mainly based on the rise of the price of primary commodities globally, like fuels, minerals, and agricultural products, which are the main exports of Russia. And also, there was a huge devaluation of the ruble because of the crisis during the 90s, of the big, destruction that happened after the fall of the Soviet Union. And this made domestic industrial products much more competitive, resulting in the growth of firms that could compete on the international market, apart from the ones I previously mentioned. Also, the fields of metallurgy, aeronautics, nanotechnology, the automotive sector, nuclear energy, and of course, the weapons industry. And so, yes, I think this turn in the prospects of the Russian economy had to do mainly with this international conjuncture of the rise of the price of the commodities, of the primary commodities, as well as the devaluation of the ruble because of the crisis.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So after the fall of the Soviet Union, Russia quickly adopted capitalism, but you point out in your text that while it is in the broader sense like classic capitalism, there are some specifics to Russian capitalism. So that the ruling classes of Russia, they have a little bit of a different structure than, for example, than they have in Germany. And you also use the term Bonapartism. Can you go into detail about this, please?
Okay, this term was originally introduced by Karl Marx in the 18th century of Ludovic Bonaparte. I'm not sure if it's the correct English
it's okay.
Title, because in Greek is the 18th Brumaire to Ludovico Bonaparte. And so it refers to a regime in which the state becomes independent of particular factions of capital and forcefully defends the interests of capital as a whole against threats from particular capitalists or against threats from the working class. In this sense, we can see in Russia that the figure of Putin plays such a role, the persona which somehow is over the interests of separate capitalist factions and represents the interests of the ruling class of Russia as a whole. That's what we mean and how we use the term Bonapartism, and it comes from Karl Marx, as I said before. And if I may add something about the Russian ruling class, political scientists and political economists, refer to the Russian ruling class as political capitalists. That's why, that's because, they are businessmen whose competitive advantage does not lie to advanced technology or cheap labor mainly, but mainly to the political positions they occupy in the state or around the state. So there is corruption, there is informal control of political elites over enterprises, and that's why there is a preoccupation in Russia with protecting sovereignty by the elites, because their interests are mainly, connected with the control of the state. And so, if you make money by taking advantage of the political opportunities of the state, you must have monopoly power over the state. And this power can be threatened by transnational capital or influential groups within the country that want to turn the table. If I'm using the correct term.
Yes. Turn the tables, or flip it around for their own advantage.
Yes. And I think that's why the Russian regime is so centralized at this point, because of this situation.
Did it ever recover to the point that it was as stable as pre-1990?
As I said, the period of the rapid growth started in 1999 and ended abruptly in 2008. And at that point, only 1 year had passed since the gross domestic product and the real wages having returned to the Soviet Union levels, like 20 years, almost 17 years after the fall of the Soviet Union. The fact that Russia's exports continued to be based mainly on primary commodities, hydrocarbons, fuels, metals, and agricultural products, makes its economy more vulnerable to price fluctuations from the world market. And in addition, the government of Putin had imposed the complete liberalization of the movement of capital in 2006. And this led to the economy of Russia being very vulnerable to the 2008 financial crisis and the recession, which resulted in a recession of almost 8% in 2009. And after a brief recovery period between 2010 and 2012, this period was followed by a period where there was a fall of the price of primary commodities due to what I said before, the fact that there were no investments into the 2010s. There were investments, but the rate of investments was very low, and that led to a fall in the price of primary commodities from 2014 to 2020, which actually led to a stagnation of the Russian economy in the previous decade, with low or even negative growth rates from 2015 and onwards. And so, actually, this meant that they never managed to overcome the problems and the decline that had followed after the fall of the Soviet Union. Because there was a growth, but this ended, and then you have stagnation.
So So what was the situation? Like in the direct prelude to the attack. So What was going on? What made it interesting to start this war?
Yes, I mean, what I described meant that Russia's national capital and its political representatives were up against the wall because at home you have economic stagnation, great inequalities, and growing dissatisfaction with the government. There was even a mass demonstrations movement in 2018 against the neoliberal pension reform. And abroad, there was a relative decline of the Russian economy in relation to the capital center. There was a loss of privileged markets and of geopolitical power with Ukraine's rapprochement towards the Euro-Atlantic bloc. There was an attempt to change the balance of power through military intervention in Crimea and Donbass. And there were the economic sanctions of the West since 2014. So
when this war, in my opinion, actually started.
Yes, yes. And so the situation was rather, risky and quite challenging for the elites in Russia. But because of the rebound in 2021 after the abolition of the lockdowns, there was a huge increase in primary commodities, which offered Russia economic surpluses of very, very big economic surpluses in 2021, which enabled the Russian government to finance the invasion and to be able to keep its currency relatively stable against the new economic sanctions. And so it's clear that they were in a very difficult situation, and there was this this development with the rise of the price of the primary commodities, which gave them the resources to enter into the war and to try to reverse this economic, geopolitical, political, and social crisis in Russia through war.
Okay.
And so this is our point of view about what was exactly the situation that they faced and what they did about it. So war is not only has not only this geopolitical dimension, but also the war option is an attempt to consolidate national unity, to ensure submission of the population, which previously was rather dissatisfied, and to reverse the social delegitimization of the regime by blaming the deteriorating conditions of the population on the foreign enemy, on NATO, all this stuff. Militarism, as a British Marxist has written, is a method of redistribution in favor of capital, and not only through increased spending on the armed forces, but as a method of lowering living standards and aspirations, and thus a gigantic increase in the rate of exploitation. On the other hand, the war option tried to be a solution to the problem of overproduction of the Russian arms industry, and also constitutes an attempt to restore the economic and geopolitical power of the country by military means. Also, of course, the seizure of the very rich national resources of Ukraine, like minerals, natural gas, grain, industrial facilities, as well as cheap and skilled labor, is obviously a not insignificant factor. Apart from these more economic factors, the war also aimed to solve some of the fundamental problems of the Bonapartist regime itself. more precisely, it's preservation. How to guarantee the stability of this regime?
How to maintain power?
Yes, because previously we have seen that in Belarus and in Kazakhstan there were huge demonstrations and uprisings against the elites and the ruling factions and the governments. And even if we see, that there was a kind of support of this uprising by the West, this is completely irrelevant as we see it. There were, social factors, social causes of these uprisings, and these regimes actually survived thanks to the help of the Putin's government. Mm-hmm. But if such protests happened in Russia, who would save Putin? Mm-hmm. And so war is needed to guarantee the continuity of power. So the delegitimization of the regime would not, lead to a
insurrectional moment.
Of guard in the. And I think they wanted, to for sure to completely avoid this this possibility. Mm-hmm. And so the result is that the regime has become more repressive, more ideological, more mobilized, and the war is aimed at strengthening the regime. Mm-hmm.
But for it to how can I say, to be successful in their effort, they also now need an absolute win. So they cannot. It's bad days for compromise. So moving over to the Ukraine, who is currently, at least officially, the other party in this conflict. What was the situation of the Ukraine after the fall and the disbanding, especially for the Ukraine, is like it also kind of broke away from the main bloc. So what was their situation after the fall of the Soviet Union? How did they recover, or did they even recover?
The situation in Ukraine was even worse than Russia. Mm-hmm. They never really recovered after the fall of the USSR. I mean, Russia, at least in 2007, reached the levels of GDP and real wages that they had during the fall of the Soviet Union. But in Ukraine, this did not happen. And this was also expressed in a very big fall of the population of the country. I mean, the population fell from 53 to 42 million people between 1990 and 2021. We're talking about a decrease of almost 11 million people. While its gross domestic product per capita fell by around 30%. And if we see the window of the first 10 years after the fall of the Soviet Union, then this was even worse. I mean, in 1998, the gross domestic product, the per capita income, was almost a third of the respective income in 1989, which is an extreme social catastrophe without a precedent. And after after 1999, there was a rebound and a period of growth due to the reasons that I mentioned before, the rise of the commodity price and the growing global demand. Mainly in the case of Ukraine, metallurgical products. Also, there was a growth of domestic consumption through the credit expansion, and especially the expansion of household borrowing at that period. But this ended abruptly in 2008, and it went even worse after 2008 than Russia. And why? Because also it had to do with the antagonism between the Ukraine and Russian elite.
Interesting. So what was the relationship between Ukraine and Russia after the Soviet Union so far?
Okay. We know that in 2004, I think, there was the so-called Orange Revolution, which was the first attempt of part of the population and of part of the ruling elite to separate from Russia and enter into the Western sphere of influence. And this was met with very big reaction by Russia. Initially, as early as 2005, Russia had initially exerted economic pressure, a very big economic pressure on Ukraine, through the increase of the price of gas, which is a major cost factor for the Ukraine industry. And this pressure was the first economic measure to prevent this rapprochement of Ukraine with the Euro-Atlantic bloc. So then this got even worse in the 2010s because in 2013, when the Ukraine government wanted also to sign a trade agreement with the European Union, Russia banned imports from the Ukraine, which led to a very big, which would lead to a very big recession because 25% of Ukraine exports were at that point were going to Russia, and such a move, brought the industry of Ukraine to its knees. And the president of Yanukovych at that point was forced not to sign the trade agreement with the European Union because of this event. And this, as we know, triggered the Maidan uprising, the fall of Yanukovych, the rise to power of Poroshenko, and subsequently the annexation of Crimea by Russia and the secession of the provinces in Donetsk and Luhansk. And so the relation was really, antagonistic, and especially Russia, tried to do everything they could, economically first, to prevent the separation of Ukraine from its sphere of influence and its entry into the Euro-Atlantic bloc. And I think this is still going on with the war.
Why was it so interesting for the let's say for the ruling classes or the elites of Ukraine to latch on to Western capitalism instead of Russian capitalism?
Because it seemed that their connection with Russian capitalism did not have very great results for them. As if you see the economic data, I mean, it was a disaster. Because, of course, Russia was in a much bigger position and Ukraine in a subordinate position. Whereas they thought that within the Euro-Atlantic bloc, they would achieve another position,
another standing
in the hierarchy, of the Euro-Atlantic bloc. Whereas Russia just, had. They thought that it was kept, below through all these, pressures with the price of gas, with the banning of exports, so on and so forth.
So with the relations at an all-time low, Zelensky was elected president. Sorry, I forgot the exact time code. And actually not too long ago. But he is actually also not, a full-fledged politician in terms of that he has been from a political family. He's more of a media kind of character, and he also was not staunchly anti-Russian in his rhetoric. This changed over time. Do you have kind of a schedule why and when it changed for him?
Okay, why? I mean, there were even threats of assassination by the extreme right wing, parts of the political forces in Ukraine by, for example, the Azov battalion, because initially he was, as you said, he was voted taking a position against the nationalist agenda, and he tried to implement a ceasefire with Russia. He did an exchange of prisoners, and he appeared to be moving towards the implementation of the Minsk agreement, and that's why, you know, the extreme nationalist and right-wing groups did not want this development and did not obey the orders to disengage in Donbass, and constantly threatened Zelensky with assassination. And at the same time, I must say that he had no politically organized force behind him, because, as you said, he was an actor before. He was not a politician. It was revealed that he belonged to the clan of the pro-Russian oligarch Kolomoisky, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. And when there were sanctions imposed by the United States on Kolomoisky for an alleged complicity in the manipulation of the United States election, Zelensky gradually distanced himself from him and increasingly moved towards the Western, pro-Western sphere of influence. And I think that he had no other option because of the fact that he had no real political, how to say,
backing.
Yeah, okay, for sure. He had no other option. If we think it on a level of how to say, completely cynical way. Of course, he had another option. Yes, I'm not saying that he could do differently, but with the threat of being assassinated, you know, of being I don't know, sanctioned or imprisoned by the extreme right wing and the nationalist elements in Ukraine, which are very strong after 2014. So he looked towards his political survival, and not only his political survival, but also to his becoming a new leader. And actually, he succeeded in becoming a new nationalist leader of Ukraine.
Yes, true, very true.
Yeah,
he's like a king now.
Yeah,
down there. So summarizing this a little bit, the situation for both the countries was bad economically, and the rulers of the country were how can I say, under scrutiny by their own population. So there was no wide acceptance of their power. It was questioned. There was uprising. Could the escalation that they started, I already used the term, so maybe we even answered that question, but just as a summary again, like, could the escalation that started between the two countries be considered a gamble, and with what at stake?
Yes, for sure. A war is always a gamble. You know, you don't know the result beforehand. And the possibility of military defeat and economic disaster would be absolutely devastating for Russian capital and the political representatives, Putin and the rest of the gang. And the generalized misery and the heavy human cost inflicted to the Russian working class by the continuation of the war, in such a case, would lead certainly to a delegitimization of Putin governments, and maybe to a social uprising against the war and the capitalist warmongers, since it could possibly lead to the refutation of the promise of stability, which is connected with Putin's figure, because, you know, Putin somehow is a king because, as you said, for Zelensky, because he represents stability. that didn't exist in the first 10 years after the fall of the Soviet Union. And if this stops, then for sure the situation, the social situation, the political situation in Russia will completely change.
Do you think that the Russians in a, how can I say, in a situation of a loss for Russia, that they would actually call, like, figuratively for the head of Putin?
Yes, I think that probably this will be the most probable outcome of if Russia is defeated, and with very bad consequences for Russian population. I mean, hundreds of thousands of soldiers dying, economic hardships, all the crazy stuff that will happen. Till now, it hadn't happened like that. I mean, it seems that stability is still, quite good, both on an economic and on a social level and political level. But this may change if the war effort does not go as they wanted to go.
Is it the same for the Ukraine? Or is it even more existent? I don't know if because what you described for Russia seems like almost the same. Like either you are become like a failed state, to say in quotation marks, or you cease to exist as a state, which would be probably the case for the Ukraine. So, are there similarities or different? Or what are the differences between the outcome how can I say, for a loss in this conflict?
You mean for the elites?
Yeah, or for you generally, for you, what would happen in the Ukraine if they lose that war?
They actually will become a colony of Russia. Okay, they will completely lose any independence and autonomy. Okay, this is the possibility for Ukraine. For Russia, the possibility is also to be, even to be dissolved, because also Russia is a federation. There are centrifugal tendencies, and I think that's what the NATO tries to do, because they don't want a unified race. They think that Russia is a very big country that should not exist.
Divide and conquer.
Yes.
Okay.
They don't want such a big player against geopolitical player such as Russia, which also has not the economic at this point background to support its role as a political player. And I think that so in one case annexation, or not formally but actually, and on the other case division and destruction, maybe the state as it exists now. Okay, what else? Also, there's another danger, which is the escalation.
Oh yeah,
because if Russia faces the prospect of dissolution, then this will be really dangerous for all the for the livelihood of everyone in the world, because it's a nuclear power and they may use nuclear weapons if the existence of the state as such is threatened. Let's hope that this will not happen.
Oh, we have a Deadpool going on in some lefty chats that I am in, so we're actually pardon the cynicism here, but it's maybe a coping mechanism. But we have a Deadpool going on whether we will have a nuclear detonation this year. Because I don't think that it will be full-out nuclear war from the get-go. I think they will kind of like test the water a little bit before that.
Yeah, sure.
I make this joke almost in every episode by now, but I still hope that a nuclear winter will mitigate the global warming. So maybe we're in a good place afterwards.
Okay. For sure it will mitigate it, but there will be no people around,
Oh, maybe.
Maybe a few thousand, yeah.
Yeah, but maybe it will make agitation for us communists a little bit easier, because I think educating like a couple of dozens of mutants might be easier than educating 80 million in Germany. So it's like.
Yes. Okay. Let's hope
Sorry,
that
I always I always use humor as a coping mechanism, so don't mind me going. What can we learn from this? Actually, like before we talk about the potential prospects of the future, which we also already did a little bit. But so you used the title "War and Crisis" on purpose. So are wars and crises, or war as a kind of crisis, are they becoming increasingly ways to consolidate power and to, how can I say, mitigate or hide the paradoxical situations that we have in capitalism?
As we see it, the reproduction of global capitalism is necessarily crisis-ridden. Mm-hmm. And the outbreak of a crisis is not a sign of an imminent decline or collapse of capitalism. Actually, is a feature of capitalism.
Not a bug, a feature.
Yeah, and it's not a bug. Yeah, it's a feature. Yeah, and war and preparation for war belong to the basic arsenal of the capitalist states and are utilized and have been utilized, very often in order to pass the costs of the crisis to the other states and to gain a more favorable international position, as well as to impose national unity and discipline at home, and to pass the costs of the crisis to the population, the working class, especially. So, yes, for sure, wars and crises are ways to consolidate power, but it's not something new. It's something that it's the the basic and the default functioning of the capitalist machine. It's crisis-ridden, war-ridden, and contradictory, and irrational from a point of view of the needs and the desires of the great part of the population of the earth.
So nothing new, as cynical as this sounds. So this is just, how can I say, all that we have going on currently. It's just I like the English term. In German we call it Betriebsgeräusch, like the sound a machine makes when it moves. So it's nothing more than that to you.
Yeah. Okay. Nothing more than that. It's something expected and something that will not change if we do not abolish capitalism.
Fair enough. That's where we're absolutely on the same page. So this is also why I tend to, if people ask me, so what is your solution to this conflict? And I always tell them, like, in this system, in the capitalist system of production, I don't have a solution. I just don't. So what to do now? Oh, well, abolish capitalism. It's easier said than done, but I don't see another point.
Participate in class and social struggles for the satisfaction of our needs against, the attempts of the states to pass the costs of the crisis to our backs through war, through inflation, through all these methods that I mentioned before.
So my last question for today is, it's been over a year now. We had the official anniversary of the war, or of the reheating of the war. I really reject the notion that the war started in February 2022. So I know these kinds of questions are really, really dangerous, and one tends to eat their own words after a couple of months anyway. But as blurry as it might be, what is your speculation right now on the next couple of weeks, months, maybe? So what could you see happening? Like not a, how can I say, not a prophecy, but more of a like it could go that way.
Yeah, we're not prophets, but it seems that the military conflict will continue for much longer. It has become clear, I think, that this is a war of attrition and a war of entrenchment. And this is a truly grim prospect for the population of Ukraine and Russia, and for working people throughout the world. And for us, the only hope for this to change is the development of a broad social struggles against the war within the countries involved. Firstly in Russia, which gets invaded, and in Ukraine, and all around the world. Right now, we can see, that there are some signs. For example, you have draft evasion in Ukraine, or you have the same thing, the flight of people against the draft in Russia. So there are some signs. Sure, they are very, weak, but maybe, if this continues and the situation of the people deteriorates even more, then this nationalist, ideology and false consciousness may be dissolved, and people realize that the enemy is not the fellow worker. And the enemy is at home. Is our own ruling class and the capitalist class, which is divided nationally, but at the same time it's globally rules all the world.
Okay, nice. Thank you. I think this was a very nice talk. So maybe in the future we could continue with the other texts that you have issued. I have read the one about imperialism. I didn't read was the second or the third one about imperialism?
It's the second one.
Okay, I didn't read the third one then yet. Okay, cool. Looking forward to this. I'm currently also, just a little bit of an outlook for our audience. I'm currently in talks with some organizers or people who work with people who fled the army of Ukraine and Russia, and I'm trying to get some how can I say, some background information in what's going on there, because I don't know if Yanni, if you know this, but for example, in Germany, we have severe travel restrictions on Russians. So even if you flee Russia because you do not want to participate in that war, we don't let you in. And what I've heard is that a lot of them are currently stranding in Serbia, and Serbia is currently, it's just things that I've heard. I need to make my sources, how can I say, need to validate my sources a little bit better maybe, but from what I've heard, is Serbia is so pro-Russian currently that they practically send them back when they discover them. So if they see that they have deserters in Serbia, Russian deserters, they just send them back and back, and that's pretty grim outlook.
If I may add something about that, I have a comrade from the Czech Republic told me that there, the Czech Republic sends to Ukraine the list of people working from the social security system.
Oh my!
And some of them are actually expelled and drafted.
Pardon my French, but fuckers, really, snitches.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
It's like I think it was an American politician who said, "We're going to defeat Russian even if it kills the last Ukrainian." It was something in the vein of that. So it's a war fought on the backs of people. It's really, really horrifying. All right. Thank you for being with me. It was really great. So hope to see you in person when I'm back in Athens, and hope to see you also on this show again, maybe for a continuation of the series that you're writing currently.
Thank you very much. And I really hope that we'll meet also in person.
Okay, take care.
Leute, wir brauchen eure Hilfe. Wenn euch dieses Video gefallen hat, klickt auf Like, abonniert den Kanal und vergesst nicht das Glöckchen zu drücken, damit ihr benachrichtigt werdet, wenn wir neuen Content droppen.
Außerdem solltet ihr uns überall folgen, wo wir verfügbar sind. Das ist Facebook, Instagram, Twitter und Twitch. Und wenn wir irgendwelche Ankündigungen machen oder Posts, dann shared, was das Zeug hält. Gebt uns all eure Liebe.
Wir haben mittlerweile ziemlich signifikante Kosten. Wenn ihr es euch irgendwie leisten könnt, unterstützt uns doch auf Patreon. Dann kommt ihr auch in den Genuss verschiedener Vorteile, wie zum Beispiel Zugang zu unserer Discord-Community oder Zugang zu den ultrageheimen Patreon-Episoden, die wir dort posten. Außerdem könnt ihr uns natürlich auch über PayPal Spenden zukommen lassen.
Außerdem haben wir mittlerweile einen eigenen Online-Shop. Das heißt, wenn ihr euch immer noch fragt, was ihr euren Lieben zu Weihnachten, Ostern oder sonst wie schenken könnt, geht dorthin und kauft duftes Merch.
Alle Links dazu hier in der Beschreibung oder auch auf unserer Webseite 99zu1.de.
Vielen Dank fürs Dabeisein, danke für die Unterstützung und wir sehen uns in diesem Theater.